And the special meeting of the governor. Yes, absolutely. The morning,
How are you?
How are you?
Tired. Well, it has been a long day. It has started 4:45 in the morning with the news that Russia started bombing several cities and several military infrastructures of the Ukrainian army. So since 5 o'clock in the morning, we have been reaching out all over the world in order to build a front against Russian aggression on the diplomatic side, and to build a big majority on the European Union General Assembly to condemn Russia. We know that Russia will veto at the Security Council, but then it has to be voted on the General Assembly, and I've been reaching out with many countries around the world, forging an alliance with people who want to protect the sovereignty of the nations, the freedom of the people, the integrity of the borders inside internationally recognized borders. That has been from the reach out. Diplomatic reach out that still constitutes an important tool on facing Russia. And second, building the sanctions that has been agreed more or less by the repair member states, and now it has to be decided by the leaders, and tomorrow will be formally agreed by the Foreign Affairs Council on my proposal, because as you know, sanctions is something that belongs to the competence of the Council.
Est-ce que vous allez mettre SWIFT?
With these new sanctions, will they include SWIFT as well?
I cannot go into detail. I cannot tell you who is going to be, who is not going to be. New people will be, also from Belarus, and there is a complex package with economic sectors, technology, transportation, innovation, more sanctions in the financial sector, more listing of the people. It's a powerful package, but I cannot go sector by sector to explain the details.
Est-ce que SWIFT, le président ukrainien vous demande de déconnecter la Russie de SWIFT?
Je sais.
Est-ce que ce paquet SWIFT est sur la table?
Ça sera au chef d'État et du gouvernement de décider.
Representative, I noticed that you have your phone.
Sanctions aren't saving Ukrainian lives right now.
Certainly not. How do you want sanctions that has still not been approved to have effects? Let's be serious. Let's be serious. The sanctions has not been approved yet. How can they be having effects?
Representative, I've noticed that you have your two phones with you. Who have you been calling?
Who is?
Who have you been calling?
Well, there's a long list. More than 20 countries. African Union, in Latin America, Southeast Asia. I've been talking with India, with Japan, with...
So do you think that a diplomatic solution is still possible?
A diplomatic solution, but the time being, is completely override. You see what's happening. A nuclear power, a country who has the nuclear arm, is launching a brutal attack against its neighbor. An unjustified attack and brutal attack to its neighbor, and threatening everybody that could come and help Ukraine, threatening with the use of nuclear weapons. Do you realize how grave is this?
Est-ce que vous craignez une extension de la guerre, comme l'a dit le chancelier allemand, à d'autres pays européens?
Well, with Putin, nothing is excluded. Nothing is excluded, but by the time being, we have enough work what's happening in Ukraine. Certainly, we are going to put a strong package on the table, and as the member states, the heads of state and government to decide, and for me tomorrow to go to the council and to make my fellow ministers to agree by unanimity. And then the sanctions will start having effects once they will be implemented. Thank you. I cannot go into detail. I cannot tell you who is going to be, who is not going to be. New people will be, also from Belarus.
Okay.
And at 4:45 in the morning.
Guten Abend, Herr Bundeskanzler.
Das ist heute ein sehr schwieriger Tag für den Frieden in Europa. Und deshalb kommt es darauf an, dass die Europäische Union, dass die Mitgliedstaaten zusammenstehen, dass wir entschlossen und geschlossen sind und dass wir hier zügig Entscheidungen treffen, die eine Reaktion auf die flagrante Verletzung des Völkerrechts durch Russland darstellen. Das ist gut vorbereitet und deshalb hoffe ich auch, dass wir hier schnell zu einem guten Ergebnis miteinander kommen. Das ist notwendig, um dafür zu sorgen, dass wir wieder sicherstellen können, dass die Achtung des Völkerrechts eine größere Bedeutung bekommt, dass wir eine Gegenmaßnahme ergreifen können gegen das, was Russland unternommen hat. Und dazu zählt für mich vor allem, dass jetzt die notwendigen weiteren Sanktionen verhängt werden, als gemeinsame Handlung der gesamten Union.
Herr Bundeskanzler, befürworten Sie SWIFT in einem Sanktionspaket?
Es ist ganz klar, dass wir hier sehr lange und über viele Wochen vorbereitet haben, was wir jetzt zu entscheiden haben. Und im Hinblick auf Geschlossenheit und Entschlossenheit ist es ganz wichtig, dass wir die Maßnahmen, die jetzt die letzten Wochen vorbereitet sind, beschließen und uns alles andere aufbehalten für eine Situation, wo das notwendig ist, auch noch andere Dinge zu tun.
Wie soll so eine
Bedeutet das ja oder
Situation
nein?
aussehen, die noch weiter eskaliert?
Das ist, glaube ich, ganz wichtig, dass wir hier präzise Maßnahmen ergreifen. Und das ist eine Arbeit, die viele Wochen und viele Monate vorangebracht worden ist, mit vielen Expertinnen und Experten immer wieder rückgekoppelt worden ist. Und dieses Gesamtpaket ist, glaube ich, genau das, was wir jetzt brauchen. Und deshalb ist es gut, dass wir genau diese Arbeit investiert haben. Denn wir haben uns vorbereitet auf diesen Tag, auch wenn wir alles dafür getan haben, dass er nicht eintritt. Denn neben der Ankündigung von Sanktionen haben wir uns ja auch die ganze Zeit darum bemüht, mit diplomatischen Mitteln Putin von diesem falschen Weg abzubringen. Das ist nicht gelungen. Er hat sich jetzt dazu entschieden, die Ukraine mit einem Krieg zu überziehen. Aber er wird diesen Krieg nicht gewinnen, denn die Bürgerinnen und Bürger Europas wollen Frieden, Rechtsstaatlichkeit und Demokratie. Das haben ja auch die Bürgerinnen und Bürger der Ukraine klar und deutlich gezeigt. Schönen Dank. Die ganze Zeit darum bemüht, mit diplomatischen Mitteln Putin von diesem falschen Weg abzubringen. Das ist nicht gelungen. Er hat sich jetzt dazu die eine Reaktion auf die flagrante Verletzung des Völkerrechts durch Russland darstellen. Das ist gut vorbereitet und deshalb hoffe ich auch, dass wir hier schnell zu einem guten Ergebnis miteinander kommen.
colleagues going to go tonight against Russia?
Well, we have a very, very difficult today. The situation is very grave. Everything that was predicted actually happened. We hoped that it's not going to happen, but it did. So we have to be very united on the European level and have to give a very strong signal. So, of course, strong sanctions, we have to agree on those. It has two effects. One is the deterring effect, but the other effect is punishing also the adversary, making the adversary weaker so that he can't make other steps towards the countries. And I must say it's a very difficult day because for us we have our Independence Day today. We celebrate our freedom today. Ukraine is fighting for their freedom at the same time. We have to do everything to support Ukraine with practical tools, also military aid, also the financial support, but also politically. I think we have to give strong signals that European doors are not closing, NATO doors are not closing, and I also personally think that Putin is underestimating the strength of the Ukrainians to fight for their freedom and fight for their country. Thank you.
Do strong sanctions also include SWIFT?
We have the discussions going on. I think there are several elements that you know that could be on the list. So this is the agreement that we finally have, but yes, this could be one of those.
What's your position on it? Are you frustrated at the gradual approach, meaning how slow the EU has been with the sanctions?
No, because first there was only the recognition of those people's republics. So it was clear that we can divide the sanctions into two. But then the full incursion followed, where is that? I mean, now we have to put the full package that is there.
Was it hard for you today to see the videos of the Russian invasion, especially on your Independence Day, being so close by geographically?
Actually, there are 1,300 kilometers from Tallinn to Kiev, and there are 1,300 kilometers from Kiev to Berlin. So it's exactly the same length that we are from Kiev. So everybody should be equally afraid. Not only those countries who have, border with Russia, but also every other country. And I also think that for the whole world, I think all the countries should condemn this. We have the UN charter that explicitly says that you can't do this. So if a country is doing this, I think every country in the world should condemn this, because otherwise there might be other big countries who get the ideas to appetite for the territories of their neighbors.
The Americans are talking about that the Russian goal could be or is decapitating the government in Kiev. What does that mean?
That means that the Kremlin's approach or ideally is to change the government in Ukraine and maybe put somebody under their control to run the country. But I hope it's not going to happen. I mean, Ukrainians are going to fight, so we have to support them.
You fear for the president's life after?
We have been in that part of the history. So after the Russians came in 1940s, there were also lists and people were executed. People were sent to Siberia, and we suffered, very big atrocities due to this. So I think we should be aware, and I mean, I'm petrified that these things can happen in 2022. You thought that those things are all past, and now it's all happening.
Are you worried that after tonight's package, the EU will have no more ammunition left?
EU is the economic power, so definitely the tools that we have in our toolbox are also economical sanctions. But I have been thinking there are also other ways. For example, Ukraine could also sue Russian Federation for the damages that they have caused to their country. And by this, there's also the implication on those, payments that the European side or any other country has to make to Russia, so they can keep and withhold those payments and pay those out to Ukraine. That's also maybe a very fresh thought, but there are other tools in the toolbox for all the countries to think about, not only European Union countries.
What do you think about the security situation of your own country? Aren't you afraid that this conflict might just blow up and escalate and we will be all in it?
We should all be afraid, but we don't see direct military threat at our borders right now. Of course, we see cyber attacks, but we are maybe more used to those. Every country should be also aware of the cybersecurity situation in their countries. So I think equally the whole Europe should be very concerned regarding what is going on in Ukraine.
Do you think that Western Europe was rather naive when it comes to Putin?
We definitely have more know-how of how Russia operates, and it is not a democracy. So Kremlin and Putin's administration is not thinking like we are thinking, and we. Therefore, it's very hard to understand for the Western world who haven't really experienced this on their skin.
So Macron was too fresh to go to Moscow.
No, I don't think it's wrong that the different countries wanted to have a dialogue with Russia, because everybody wanted to keep them doing what they're doing right now. So I think all the efforts are necessary for a dialogue. But what we see today is that Russia was just playing. They didn't have any wish to really have a dialogue. I think their idea was to try to pressure something out of NATO, out of EU, some kind of concessions in addition to Ukraine. But I'm glad that our unity kept and no such concessions were given, even small ones. I think it's important. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. It's been a long day. How are you today?
Right now, Europe is experiencing the biggest military invasion since the Second World War. Putin's regime, it turns out, together with the Belarusian regime, are literally attacking with tanks, guns, missiles, soldiers, a free and independent, peaceful neighboring country, Ukraine, blatantly disregarding international law, any common decency, and of course overstepping and not acknowledging the right of national self-determination. We're meeting tonight to say what is Europe's combined response to that. And our response has to be united, and it has to be broad, and it has to be deep. So we need to say very clearly to Putin that this is by no means acceptable. And the general direction is to isolate ever more Putin and his regime from the rest of the world through the various sanctions. What's very important is that the sanctions are coordinated. That is, between the European Union, the United States, Canada, Great Britain, Japan, Australia, throughout the democratic world. The first wave of sanctions were very swift and very coordinated. I'm hoping that the next wave, which is today, that these will be equally coordinated, swift, and united. A second point, which is extremely important, that we all, as democratic nations, need to continue to support Ukraine. Ukraine needs two kinds of support. It needs financial support, because the war effort and the lack of investment, etc., that's costing them an enormous amount of money. We need to continue supporting Ukraine financially. And the second aspect is militarily. Also, my country, the Baltic countries, Poland, some others are supporting Ukraine militarily. We think it's extremely important. They are fighting back. We need to give them the tools, the ammunition, the weapons to help them put up this resistance. It, I think, is our moral right as peace-loving democracies.
Will this wave of sanctions include cutting Russia off SWIFT?
SWIFT, I think it's a very right direction. I think we should go in this direction. But what is key, and it would work only if this is a worldwide agreement. That is, it would not be enough only for Europe or some other, but it would have to be everyone combined together.
What can you say about Ukraine's military defense? You just mentioned that Lithuania is supporting militarily. What can you say about how the defense has gone today?
Well, I've been in meetings and in a plane. I'm not reading the latest news, but certainly the Ukrainians are putting up a fight. It's very uneven. That is, Russia's military might and the amount of firepower that they have concentrated on Ukraine is immense. But they are fighting, and I'm convinced they will continue to fight.
Are you frustrated?
Is impressed by the new sanctions regime? Do you think he could invade the Baltic states next?
The Baltic states are part of NATO. Ukraine is not part of NATO. That is the sad reality. So in the Baltic states, we have, if I'm not mistaken, 27 out of 30 NATO member state militaries in our region, even as we speak. And these militaries, even as we speak, are being upgraded. So just today, a first wave of additional American soldiers and equipment arrived in my country. The Canadians are sending also men and equipment. Germany is doing the same. Great Britain is doing the same. So the forces in the Baltics are not just our own military forces, but there are, say, in Latvia, it's at all times 10 other NATO member state militaries, now 11 with the United States coming on board, and those militaries are being augmented. So it's very different. In NATO, we have Article 5 today. The NATO meeting was extremely powerful. An attack against one is an attack against all. And literally in the Baltics, if one were to attack, you would physically end up attacking basically all other NATO member states. So this is different. We're not so concerned about the military threat as the threat to democracy as such, because Putin's goal is not very clearly defined. But it's very clear as one thing, he is fighting against democracy. We all live in democratic national countries. Putin disregards this. He is thinking still in terms of empire. He's trying to create an empire. So if he can attack Ukraine, theoretically, it could be any other European country, because the democratic ideas, if they were to get to Russia, they could overturn his government, and he's fighting for power. We're all politicians. I'm also facing elections in October. The way I am going about is convincing people what I have done good for society. How Putin does it is by jailing, by arresting, by making opposition illegal. There have even been people who have been killed in Russia in the opposition by silencing the opposition. This is a completely different world, and this is what he is fighting against. Our way, actually, it's our way of life that he's fighting against.
Prime Minister, the President Russian would actually say, you ask one question, please. Prime Minister, President Putin would actually say that it's that military buildup of NATO in eastern parts of Europe that is the problem. By increasing those military troops in eastern parts of Ukraine now, aren't you making the problem even worse?
Okay, so when a woman is raped, the rapist says it was the way that she was dressed, she was provocative. That's hogwash. It's the same here. NATO is a defensive alliance that countries such as mine wanted to join. Why? Because we feel threatened by Russia. It is a defensive alliance. NATO is not and never will encroach on anyone, and Putin knows this very well. This is the most meaningless argument that he puts. NATO is not the threat. The threat is Ukrainian independence and democracy. That's what he's fighting to squash, and that is what we have to stand up against.
Can you hear from Zelensky's life and the government's life?
there is military activity. There's a war going on in Ukraine. I'm concerned about everyone's well-being in Ukraine.
The Americans say the goal is to decapitate the government. What does that mean?
Again, Putin is putting in tanks, guns, soldiers, and missiles to annihilate Ukraine's independence. Full stop.
Is it true that Hungary at the NATO is blocking Ukraine's access to the NATO's cyber defense tool? This was said by the Ukrainian defense minister. Do you know about this issue?
I don't have any information on that.
Sir, do you think we have been too naive when it comes to Putin, especially Western Europe?
I think that for many years, many in Europe who have wanted peace have assumed that Putin also wants peace. This turns out to be blatantly wrong. Putin is actually wanting and creating this war without any pretext. There's no reason for this war. It's his own mind and a very skewed and perverse reading of history, which is having him send his own soldiers, many of whom will also die. It's senseless. And this is what we have to understand. History has seen before, in World War II, a deluded autocrat creating misery for millions. We're seeing the same thing today. And we have to understand that this is what the beginning of a war like that must have felt like, that you have a deluded autocrat who is attacking a neighbor. If we do not stand up to that, what is it that we stand for? Thank you very much.
For us, we have our Independence Day today. We celebrate our freedom. The situation is very grave. Everything that was predicted actually happened. We thought that, we hoped that it's not going to. Is that, I mean, now we have to put the full package that is there.
What is your concern for the European? See the videos of
united on the European level, and I have to give a very strong signal. So, of course, strong sanctions. We have to agree.
An independent, peaceful neighboring country, Ukraine, blatantly disregarding international law, any common decency regime from the rest of the world through the various sanctions. What's very important is that the sanctions are coordinated, that is between the European Union, the United States. Right now, Europe is experiencing the biggest military
Hát fogalmam